Welcome back to Tales and Fails Miniatures. This week we will be continuing our D&D Alchemy Shelf build. Gotten a decent amount of progress done on it. It's been a lot of fun. If you haven't checked out the previous video, please make sure to do that. And while you're at it, make sure to like and subscribe. Helps out the channel tremendously. Really excited to show you guys this. So without further ado, let's get into it. Where we left off last week, we are picking up right there. I need to build the side panels for the drawers to actually mount to. I start by getting a 3/4 inch piece of plywood and measuring it out to the exact dimensions of the box minus that 1/4 inch in the back for the back plate to go in later. And again, I don't have a track saw, but you can do it with a hand circular saw, which is what I am using here. It makes it a little bit more difficult, but definitely still possible to make very straight lines. You just have to really take your time when you're doing it. Once those side panels are cut, the next step here is to add pocket holes on the face and the bottom, just to go directly into the cabinet face and the actual footer of the cabinet. This way I know it's not ever going to move and can hold all the weight of the drawers themselves. Now that those have pocket holes in them, the next step here is to measure everything out, draw my lines for those boards to actually sit on so that I can get them screwed in. Before screwing them on, I just add a little bit of glue directly where it's going to sit. I don't have to be super careful about this. I can always sand it down later or use a wet cloth before it starts to dry to get rid of anything that squishes out. But majorly here, it's just setting it in place, clamping it in, and then putting in your pocket screws. Now that all those pocket holes are in, I did pre-drill the holes for the top. This is majorly just to give it a little bit more support and make sure it does not move. Now that that one is in place, all you have to do is the exact same steps for the other side. And now that both side panels are in, I am going to start on the drawers here. I did do this as all one piece to create my dado, which is a 1/4 inch from the bottom and a 1/4 inch deep. I ran all these through as full boards before cutting them. Looking back on it, I probably could have done it once they were all cut down to size, but at the end of the day, this seemed a little bit easier at the time. And you can see how I'm using a piece of 1/4 inch plywood to see if it actually fits, and then just really sneaking up on that cut. You do not want it to be too wide, or else your bottom board is just going to be a little floppy in the bottom, and that's what really gives your drawer some support. Once all those boards had dados in them, I ripped them through the table saw to make them the right height for each drawer opening, and then I just cut them to It was 18 inches on the sides and 9.5. Basically is what that was a measurement of how big the openings were, and then I gave a 1/2 inch on the right and left, and then about 3/8 of an inch on the top and bottom, just to make sure my drawers had plenty of room inside of those openings. To save myself a little bit of time here, is what I did is use the first ones I cut as a template. I just made the faces flush on them and then ran them through the chop saw, and this gave me close enough measurements. It doesn't need to be perfect. Your front and back plate you would like to be as close as possible, but your side plates, as long as they are equal to each other, then it shouldn't be that big of a deal. And now that all of the drawers were cut, it was time to put pocket holes in them. I put these on the opposite side of the dado because one will go all the way to the back and then the other one will be covered by the faceplate, so you'll never see these pocket holes. And the last thing I did here was go back and cut the dado off of one of the face or back plates of this. That way, once they are all put together, I can just slide the bottom panel in without having to glue it all together at the same time. It just makes it a little bit easier later on. And at this point, building the drawers is as simple as possible. You just add a little bit of glue to each of the seams and then put your pocket screws in. Make sure that you are clamping it down tight. I realized after the first one that clamping it side to side actually works a lot better, so I did those on all of the next ones and it made it a lot easier. The last step in building these drawers was to cut the bottoms. I just set the table saw to the correct width, cut all of them that direction, and then set the table saw to the correct height and cut them that direction as well. Now that the bottoms were cut, last thing to do here was add a little bit of glue to the inside of that dado. I went back with a paintbrush and actually just swashed it around a little bit to make sure it gets on all three sides. And then I just push the panels into place. If they don't go in super easily, just take a hammer, dead blow hammer preferably, and just tap them down very gently, and that seems to work pretty well. Then the last thing to do on these drawers is just go in with a finish nailer and just put a couple of 1/4 inch nails up against that back piece just to make sure that it doesn't slide out and to hold it while it's gluing. After letting these dry overnight, it was time to put the sliders on, so I marked from the face of the drawer itself 3/4 of an inch back and then mounted the sliders on there, and this just makes it to where when the sliders actually go together that the drawer sits almost flush with the face of the cabinet itself. I mounted these slides to the bottom of the cabinet. It just makes it a little bit easier because all you have to do is put it on a flat surface, hold it in place, and then screw it on. It also makes it easier for mounting the second half of this because I just cut a piece of scrap plywood to the exact height of the face and then put a 1/4-inch spacer underneath it, and that just held up the actual slider while I screwed it on. And I put the 1/4-inch spacer underneath it to lift it up a 1/4 of an inch so that the actual drawer will sit 1/4 of an inch above the actual face, making it all sit more evenly on the inside. And now that this one looks good, it's time to do the rest. One thing I will mention here, I would highly recommend starting with the top one. That way you can just slowly cut your piece of plywood down that you're using as your jig. I did not do this. I started with the lower ones and then had to take them back out in order to use my plywood. So yeah, I would just highly recommend starting with the top one and then slowly moving your way down. It just makes it a lot easier on you later. The next part of this build was to add the feet. I set my table saw to 3.5 inches because that's what I wanted the risers to actually be, and ripped all these boards completely down so that all of them were at the exact same height. And once I knew that they should be at the same height, I did a test fit on all of them to the bottom of the cabinet just to make sure everything actually sat correctly, and did any additional trimming or sanding that I needed to do before building the base. Now that I knew everything sat correctly, it was time to start drawing out that front design. I've never really done anything like this, so I wasn't sure how to do it, but I ended up going in and making 2-inch apart lines across the whole thing, after I'd already drawn it, by the way. I tried making it with just a couple of measurements, but that didn't really go so well. So again, I went in, put a bunch of 2-inch lines, and then put marks at the exact same height on both sides where I could make them as equal as possible, and then went back through and drew up to those lines, making slight adjustments until it looked correct. Honestly, I'm pretty proud of the way this turned out. I'm kind of surprised it turned out as well as it did, but I think it looks really good. I will say I cut it out with a jigsaw, but I left about an 1/8 inch gap between the line and the jigsaw because I really did not want to end up messing this up. I went back afterwards with the sander and got it as close to the line as possible, and then any smaller adjustments I went back and actually hand sanded it until everything looked almost perfect. Once I was happy with how it turned out, I just needed to go back and sand off all the pencil marks from building the design itself, and then put pocket screws in all these so that I could actually build the box itself for the base. And now that it's finally time to build the base, it's just as simple as all the other steps. Add a little bit of glue, clamp it together, and then put your pocket screws in. And I just really wanted to make sure that this was as supporting as possible, and I really didn't want any of the screws to come through my routered edges on the bottom of the cabinet. So that's why I ended up putting in all these different bottom plates and making this basically its own separate box from the cabinet itself. I think it just looks a little bit cleaner at the end, and I really think it turned out nice. With these pieces that laid flat up against the base of the cabinet itself, I just used a couple pieces of scrap plywood or, cutoffs from the different designs, and basically just anything that got it to the right height, and used that to help clamp this down so that those sat as flat as possible at the top of this base. I did have to use some shims over on that right side that you can see. This was due to that board just being a hair short, not a huge deal. Again, I just added these shims in and then screwed it together once they were in there and then broke them off. It was just a quick, easy fix, and you're never going to see these anyways, so it didn't really matter. I really liked the way this was turning out so far, but I did want to add a little bit of extra support in the center. I just didn't want to be able to see it through that front design, so I cut it about a 60-degree angle there that pushes it back just far enough to where you can't see it, and then I just added 2 more top boards to it so that I can use those to mount to the bottom of the cabinet itself. The last thing to do here was to put the feet onto the base there. I did just want to get it lined up, make sure everything fit correctly, but once I realized that it did, I just clamped it down, pre-drilled a little bit of holes, and then screwed it on. The last step for this week was to put the drawer fronts on and build the drawer fronts. I've never done this before, but I just kind of came up with the basis of it, which I measured the openings where the drawers sit, and then I wanted a 1/2 inch sticking over all the way around, and I got to that measurement due to the fact that the 1x2s that I was using for that are 1.5 inches. So I just made sure that basically it would be a 1/2 inch overlay, 1/2 inch gap, 1/2 inch overlay on each of the drawers, and that made it pretty easy. But what really made this easy on me was marking out the 1/2 inch on either side, and then I just stuck some double-sided tape to the drawer itself and put my face up against those lines to where it was lined up, and then pulled the drawer into the face, which helps hold it in place, and then I can take the drawer out and put the screws in afterwards. It just made it a lot easier on me rather than trying to measure it out in any other way. And I would always recommend, before actually screwing it together, I put the other drawers back in just to make sure everything was still lining up once the double side tape was holding that face on, because you don't want to put screw holes in it and then test it, because you can definitely mess yourself up there. And once I actually pulled these out, I did go through and double check that all the measurements were correct, that it was sitting square, everything was lined up, just to give myself a little bit more clarity on making sure that it was sitting correct. And with that, all the faces are put on, and I think they turned out amazing. Alright guys, if you have made it this far in the video, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. It helps out the channel tremendously. It does not cost you anything. So, we've gotten pretty far on it this week. We've gotten the base put on here, cut that out, along with getting the sides for the drawers put on, the drawer slides, building all the drawers, and getting all of these faces on. I think this thing turned out awesome. I'm excited to start working on the actual cabinet doors. That will be probably next week's video. But like I said, if you enjoyed this as much as I have, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll catch you next week. Cheers.